Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
It's so good to be back.
So, last time we were talking a lot about essentially just how much you need to be careful of who you give your energy to and what the sort of ideas are behind what is the valuable currency that you have in this world and who wants to take that currency from you. And are you even really aware of it?
Yeah, so in that regard, I think it would be a disservice to not talk about a few things that are ancillary, but related to the subject in a way. And the one of those is entities beyond our perception.
Mm-hmm.
If you're more religious, you'd say demons. You know, if you want to be the non religious type, you can say interdimensional beings or aliens. There's
Mm-hmm.
any number of kind of covers for these things, these beings. And the reality is they exist and they're largely outside of our perception. But they make contact, and the contact they make is almost always for the point of their own self aggrandizing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about, and this is kind of a brief overview, but when you talk about the gods of the past or something like that, you're oftentimes talking about these kind of entities. And what the author Homer separated when he wrote the Iliad, he separated man's war and God's war, or demon's war, as man fights basically for the things that he needs, food and shelter and like his substance, right? But these other entities, they fight for godly things, which is primarily worship, attention, adoration,
Mm-hmm.
things that are not necessary for them to exist. They would be just fine without these things, but they crave them and they need them. And so, like, the heroes in the Iliad are exalted as being godlike when they fight for things that are not just food, shelter, and stuff, when they fight for like aggrandizement. And so, in that regard, the rulers of our realm very much mirror this or parrot this. They want to be worshipped. They
Mm-hmm.
want your attention. They want your adoration or your rage. They'll take that too, you know, your wrath towards them. So I think in general, we have to be aware that there's an alignment between these two forces. Even if you don't believe they exist, which I think is not moronic, but everyone in history up until now has always accepted that these kind of entities exist. And then our modern day Babylon emulates that in that they are very covetous of those kinds of energies that you're giving to them. And it does something kind of otherworldly in promoting their ability to exist and their power that they have in this world. It is related to what we, the people, those that are at war with them, or they make war with us for that. That's their primary goal. You know, the money is fake. They don't need money, got all the money they want. What they want is that energy, and it gives them the ability and the power to do the things that they want to do, which is essentially building themselves up.
Yeah, so there's a couple kind of drop off points to this. Is that one, there's a quote from somebody, doesn't matter who, it's just a good quote, is the idea that number one thing that is just like nails on a chalkboard to a demon, that a demon cannot stand, is a child's laughter. It's the most innocent thing ever. When you're talking about the kind of emotions that they're harvesting, it's rage, it's frustration, it's anxiety. It's all of these very negative emotions that they want for themselves. But if you just have joy, if you have mirth in your life, then that is just the absolute worst thing for you possible. Which is why everything that's even being painted as a this is you fighting your war for your stuff is essentially just to get you to have ultimate despair of like, oh, the worst things possible are happening to me and people like me. Another drop off point is that uh, this is where Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, probably just one of the most valuable books for this. C.S. Lewis, the guy who wrote Chronicles of Narnia, very prolific fiction writer, did a lot of talking with Tolkien, who we'll probably be talking about later. And essentially, the idea of the Screw Tape Letters is the role of demons is to essentially just tempt people. And this is a Uncle Screwtape giving pointers and tips to his nephew Wormwood, who's sort of like a low-level newbie apprentice tempter. He's trying to tempt somebody, and the mechanisms behind what makes good tempting, what makes bad things, things that they want to avoid, what is their ultimate like bad thing, which is ultimately in the book, it's to make sure that they stay away from the enemy, and the enemy in this case is God, and all of the mechanisms that they are operating under, and the way in which in the book the demons are describing how they most efficaciously tempt people. Even if you do not believe in demons, you see the exact same things being repeated in the modern day world. So you don't actually have to literally believe in anything outside of the material world to see that whether or not they're real, these exact same things are being perpetrated to us in the real world.
Yeah, I think that perfectly ties in the sense that like there is a lot of literature that is written that can be helpful in its a perspective and in terms of spotting, if you will, kind of figuring out what's true and what's not true. When someone's writing something in literature, if you can look around you and go, "Oh yeah, I see how that applies," then the concept is working. And so being on guard and understanding, reading screw tape letters is a great step towards guarding yourself against these tactics. Because regardless of what you believe principally about the demons or the people, the tactics are the same, even if maybe they're trying to elicit a different response from you. And that's something you have to guard yourself. We finished off the last episode just with an exhortation to, you know, basically, if you just say it's fake, then they can't get the reaction from you. It's like,
Yeah.
oh no, everyone I know was just killed. That's fake, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's kind of pushing the envelope there, but you're getting told things like this all the time. Uh, at least where I live, I'm going to say this a bunch of times, rural area, I will be watching news or unfolding events that are maybe 50, 60 miles from where I live. And they'll be like, oh my goodness, there's horrible, horrible things happening in this area. And I'm like, not that bad.
Hmm.
Not to dox myself, but like wildfires in my area. And I'm looking around and I'm like, yeah, it's not as bad as they're making out on the news. Like the news is saying, oh, everyone's dying over here. I just ran into a couple from the UK the other night. They're touristing in my town, and I spotted them from their accent, and I stopped and talked to them, and they were like, "Oh, how did you guys do with that earthquake that happened? Just a couple months back?" On the
Yeah.
news, it said that there was like all this stuff, and I was just like, everyone here worked through it. Like, no one noticed there was nothing here, even though the news was saying this thing or that thing. So the defense is always kind of like, is that really what's going on? I mean, no one died as far as I know in this area, even though on the news they're portraying it a different way. It's the
Yeah.
same kind of illicit reaction.
Yeah, just to go specifically more into that is just the whole earthquake that goes into a tsunami, and it's like, whoa, this should be super dangerous. And if I only looked at things that I was being shown on the internet about the capacity of what this is and like what people are asking about, like, oh hey, you're in an area that would be affected by this, like, are you okay, are you careful, where it's like if you didn't see anything on the news, you wouldn't have even noticed that anything happened because
Yeah.
nothing ever happens. Literally nothing happens.
Another point for the nothing ever happens, bros.
Yeah. But there's always this trying to aggrandize it and make it be so much bigger than it actually is. And it was successful. Like there were so many people that weren't literally in the specific area that thought it was such a big thing. In the same way that this UK couple that you met thought that it was such a massive thing. And it's like, oh, everybody's got to be scared. And that, oh, everybody in where you're at, away from it, you're not scared, obviously. But people, oh, everybody that's right next to it is like they're fearing for their lives. They're having so much energy. And that's really where it comes down to, is that it doesn't matter if people actually do have all of this fearful energy. What matters is also that there is a belief that there is that fearful energy behind it. To where if you believe that, oh, everybody is freaking out about this one thing, oh, this is something that everybody really, really cares about, then all of a sudden it sort of kind of self-perpetuates, because people also believe in things that others believe. So you can sort of whole cloth um, make up something and make up the attention that it's getting. And all of the traffic around it is inauthentic, and people will believe that it is a massive real thing. which is why it's like, people will talk about, Chinese streaming services not having super authentic numbers, or maybe TikTok is kind of inflating their numbers to make it seem like, oh, hey, my TikTok got 1 million views. I got to
Yeah.
continuously make content for this over and over and over again. But ultimately, there's no reason to believe any social media number is real. There's no reason to believe that any of these people that are typing are real. Like, whether they're bot farms or they're just literal AI, why do you think that these people are even an actual person? Going back to the whole shadow profile thing, you could even just have it be to where you're modeling the AI based off of a shadow version of another person, and then you're
Yeah.
just giving it a different name. So you know exactly the archetype that you want to sort of portray and put forth. And then you're just taking that shadow archetype and then putting it towards these causes that you want to promote from that lens. And so, you want a trustworthy guy with a nice southern drawl, and you want him to say that, it's really important that this thing just pops off. uh, then you're going to get that level of like trustworthiness, even if it like there's never been a person with this accent that exists, because this is obviously not an accent that you could draw from anywhere. It's purely made up, purely fabricated. It's not real. And so, in that sense, there's no, in the same way that people don't trust, something that's on the news, something that is coming from this source or that source when it's convenient to them. Uh, Also doing it to where it's not convenient to you, but it's also just, there's no way that you can actually verify that this thing is authentic as it is presented. So why would it be authentic? What is the actual mechanism? Like me asking you, the viewer, what is the actual mechanism behind why they would ever make something be authentic and as shown as is, if not a single person in the world could actually verify this? When there's nobody that can verify something, there's no incentive to actually make sure that something is legitimate.
Yeah, this ties in to a degree what we talked about. Can't remember, it was a while back, about technology belief too. They want you to have belief that things happen because it promotes your energy to be more efficacious, and that's something they drastically want. So when you believe that bad things are happening with a very high technology of belief, then your energy that is given is more efficacious, it's more valuable to them. And this is where we end up with kind of an altruism about beliefs that are kind of silly. um, just as an off the hand kind of example, like starving children in Africa. For my growing up, this was a big thing about, eat your vegetables because they're starving children in Africa. But just the idea of donating to starving children or like to a relief fund, it was really presented in a way that if you didn't hold the belief, there could be really real consequences. And so, in that regard, you're more incentivized to believe it out of altruism, less out of social pressure. So, those beliefs that are promoted out of social pressure are not as valuable. The emotions that come from them are not as valuable, which is why you see so much news generated towards things that have an altruism around the belief of it. It's important that you believe this, and if you don't believe it, very bad things could happen. And that helps people believe it for themselves. They're like, oh, yeah, like I would totally believe this thing. Even if that's maybe not the highest tech belief, it's slightly higher than believing just because of social pressure alone. But they actually are convinced in their own mind that there's a downside to not believing that some disaster happened. That way, their energy, their worry, their fear is a better quality of energy that they're giving away. And just on the note of, you know, trusting different things and the shadow profiles, I think that is a huge aspect to how they kind of get people in, because they know what all the profiles look like. That if they know what a large subset of the population is looking for and respects, they can create that exact figurehead, the exact speech model, like you mentioned, the accent that's maybe not even 100% genuine, but like they have trillions of data points as to what exact vowel pointings and things make people sound trustworthy to a specific group of people, and then they just can just boom trigger that whole group of people really to support one particular thing.
Yeah, and so in this sense, it's, why would, if you do have ultimate control over something, even if it's just a platform, like do you think that like Mr. Beast just became a super like ultra mega billionaire when his smile doesn't reach his eyes?
Yeah.
And it's just it's like something Charles Carroll said is oh, it's just because he's, you know, he's just good at, you know, knowing the YouTube algorithm. And oh, he just managed to optimize, you know, oh, here's how these titles go. And that's
Right.
another big thing of how he sort of presents this of, oh, this person is not a very interesting person whatsoever, but oh, the reason he's super big and super successful is because he's just optimized the game as much as possible. But it's like, why would you, um, if you have control over platforms, why would you ever let an authentic voice at all become the biggest voice possible?
Yeah.
Like, why would you ever have, you know, Taylor Swift be somebody who's just a normal, authentic person? Because think about how powerful Taylor Swift is. You know, if Taylor Swift does a particular thing, uh, like, you know, half of the country's women are going to be like, you know, really into like, oh, I got to do exactly this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the most powerful spell. So giving that power over to authentic people doesn't make any sense. Even if you're not going to do anything with it, it's about the things that they don't do. Because what if all of a sudden Taylor Swift, at the height of her peak, you know, she's 31 and she's like, actually, I really don't like the singing stuff. It's actually just kind of like not great for me. I'm just going to go out of the limelight and I'm going to start a homestead and have 10 kids.
This is also ties into that point you made about Jeffrey Epstein in the past. Just that if you're buying into the concept that they let people get big and then they catch them and blackmail them, what a terrible system.
Mm-hmm.
Just from the perspective of a Babylonian, like you're going to just let people get big and then basically assume that you're going to be able to corrupt them. You know, Devil Went Down to Georgia should be a warning against that kind of approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's a really good fiddle player. I'll try to corrupt him. Doesn't work or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why would you let Taylor Swift get huge and then go and like try to get her on some, you know, blackmail charges or whatever? Why wouldn't you just have your own people filling those roles who are filling them not because of a fear of blackmail, but because that's their life. They're just on that side, you know? Letting someone else organically come up in the space is so, so risky. And like we said before, with like the extras or with any of the fake content, why leave any of that to chance when no one can ever prove it or no one's ever going to be able to say for sure, like, oh, yeah, this is how that happened or this person was a plant or whatever. Where's the downside to just planting everything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is where it's just like, why let the idea of if you take an authentic individual and then you blackmail them, which is essentially the economy that people believe that we're running under is a blackmail economy. If you have a blackmail economy, then it's like, do you really expect somebody like, you know, like Lil Wayne to be able to, you know, expertly hide the fact that he's been blackmailed or something like that?
Yeah.
Like why would you expect him to just suddenly like go from being, you know, a guy in the hood who, you know, gets shot when he's 10 and has like a cop save his life? Why would you ever want that guy? Why would you ever expect that guy to actually be a competent spy or a competent actor? Because actually keeping these things secret, keeping anything secret, most people are very incompetent at that. It doesn't matter how much you blackmail them or how much you even get them to believe that, oh, everything will burn down, my entire life will be ruined if I like reveal this fact. If you are not somebody who has proper training for that, you're going to let things slip. And the fact that things don't slip either goes into two scenarios, which is one, that there is no conspiracy, or that it's all a conspiracy. There is no middle ground. There is no in between.
Yeah. You can just look at the psychology of it. People who have been blackmailed in the past, like just looking at true crime cases, FBI, that type of thing. People get blackmailed, let's say, because they're having an affair and someone at work finds out, some executive or something, they get blackmailed. The result of almost all of those cases is the stuff comes out in the end because the person who's paying the money off or doing something like that realistically couldn't keep it together anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up, you know, spilling the beans over it. It ends up spilling out into the public. pretty much every single time. So that's just blackmail's not an effective way. Or I should say, if you're the person being blackmailed, the advice is always, just let the stuff go, because you probably can't keep that a secret anyway. It's not something that can be kept a secret. So blackmail is just not really an efficient way of continuing agents or influencers, if you will, in the space.
Yeah, and so everybody operates under this blackmail economy. And if you're somebody who operates under this blackmail economy, like, we're not even saying that blackmail is, completely worthless or that it's never going to work. But what you have to count on is it working 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Because you don't have people that are blackmailed, that are supposedly blackmailed under the system, messing up. And
Right.
when you don't have mistakes, then you have to assume that something else is different. Example, going back into something we talked about earlier with nukes, right? India and Pakistan, they're both nuclear powers.
Yeah.
They both accidentally shoot dozens of missiles at each other out of sheer incompetence. And yet there's never been a nuclear accident. Like, we're supposed to expect that these people that are just so incompetent that they just accidentally fire off warheads into enemy territory over and over and over again. Oh, they're just like perfect with, nuclear accidents and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's the stories go on and on. You can find this stuff all over YouTube too, of just like, we almost had a nuclear holocaust, but this one guy couldn't pull the trigger or whatever.
Yeah,
even when he was ordered directly to, or we dropped one and it just didn't go off. Thank goodness, right? Where it's just kind of like, you would think at some point there would be just an actual failing, but it just doesn't happen. Like, this doesn't happen.
Yeah. Think about, like, whatever, maybe like 100,000 nukes. I don't remember the exact number. 100,000 nukes that have existed, and then how many times they've been, transported, how many times they've been taken from place to place, how many like incidents where something could happen, to where there is an accident, and then there's like a 6 sigma, which is essentially the like 1 in a million chance of essentially the error rate of something that is like, all right, this is the peak of this is such a low error rate to where it's like, all right, we're willing to accept this. And there are so many times where something like nukes is like, somewhere over Ohio or Oklahoma, there was a nuke that accidentally just fell out of a plane, and it went through all 17 fail safes except for the last one, which was hanging on by a thread. And we were just like this close to, having a detonation over Oklahoma.
And obviously, it's just a manufacturing of that fear. The closer something comes to maybe have been a reality, the more we tend to believe it. Actually, that's kind of just a psychological thing. So these events, when they happen, we go, oh my goodness, it's so real because it could have happened, even though it's no more real than if it hadn't dropped out of the plane and had 17 failed fail safes in the last one. Like, it's no more real just because there's more details, just because it's closer to have actually happening. It's no more real. And also just the validity of that idea that 17 of them fail and like all these things happen. It's just down to the wire is kind of silly.
Yeah, it's just something that sort of makes, like you were saying, it just makes it feel like it is more real. And it makes for a good story, a good narrative, to where it's just like, oh, like that could have been me. People start like personalizing things of like, oh, maybe something like happens. Like, there's like, calculators for like, all right, if we look at, every type of nuclear weapon that's ever been detonated in tests, like, oh, you can put like a pinpoint on the map of where you're at and then be like, oh, what is the radius of this?
Yeah.
Like, where is the dead zone,
Yeah, exactly.
And it's also just, with the whole idea of, duck and cover, which was a big thing, during the Cold War era of essentially running everybody through these drills over and over and over again of, oh, if the sirens go off, you got to go under your desk and, put your head there. If anything, it's just more affirming that, oh, hey, this is a super real threat. And it's just the purpose of it is not to actually keep people safe, because obviously going under your desk wouldn't do anything in this situation.
There's zero scenarios, I don't care what distance you are from a nuke, where hiding under your desk helps. You're either like safe, if we're just buying into the theory of how nukes work, you're either blown to bits, you're either literally vaporized, or you're irradiated and you're going to die within a week. There's no hiding under the desk that's going to help in any of those situations.
Yep.
There's no like the meme always online, obviously, is like how far from a nuclear explosion to perfectly cook, like, a microwave pizza or whatever. Like, well, that just doesn't exist, right? If you're into physics at all, which I am, I'll admit, I went down the physics rabbit hole a lot when I was younger. and it just doesn't work. At least the way they portray it, the physics when you do the numbers, that doesn't work. So like, why then have they done this? And you can say, oh well, they were ignorant, they didn't know about the physics of that at the time. Well, they definitely knew. But like you said, the reason why is not to keep people safe, but it's to convince them it's a real thing, and
Mhm.
that the energy harvesting continues.
Yeah, and this also goes into one of the biggest sort of examples you could kind of give is the Davy Crockett's. I'll put a
Yeah.
picture up on the screen of the Davy Crockett right now. You look at this thing right there, and it is it's just, if you understand anything about how a missile would work, right? If something that you're trying to shoot in the air is big on the front, it's just gonna fall. It's gonna be very inaccurate. This is not how you would do something. Yet it was produced, over 3,000 of these, and 5 different countries had them. And the Davy Crockett would essentially have 3-man teams who, had to have special robes on. They had to have special diets to deal with the radiation. And they would just be going from military base to military base, essentially just kind of showing this thing off of. So everybody who was in the military at that time in like 5 different countries would probably have seen or heard about one of these teams. So at that point, you're creating millions of expert witnesses for this. And the best part is, because the weapon was borderline useless, like it would not have accuracy within a mile. And if you shot it, you would essentially be guaranteeing your own death.
It's a nuclear device, by the way.
Yeah, it is a nuclear device, and if you shoot it, it would be so inaccurate that you would probably die from the tailwinds. So in that sense, you're also guaranteeing that nobody is actually going to fire that weapon, even if they think that something is going to be bad, because they're trying to protect themselves. So in that sense, the only way that you could actually explain that with all of those details is that it's essentially there to sort of be creating all of these expert witnesses and giving the belief that, oh, hey, like all of these nukes are there, and like, there's one in every military base and all of these things. And, your uncle or your grandpa who's in the military is all of a sudden an expert witness who knows everything intimately about this.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about how you can't really have like the huge compartmentalization where it's like only one or two people know about that. But then there's the other end of it where the media aspect of it, that is the spell casting from afar, which we may talk about this series, maybe a different series where we talk about media, but the idea around populating the concept of nukes, you do kind of want to have that widespread compartmentalization. That's exactly where something like the Davy Crockett missile comes in, because into the program itself is built in the fact that no one who's selected for the program would ever fire it, which means you can quite literally take people who actually know nothing, these background characters, and induct them in, even if maybe one guy on each team knows the reality of what's going on. These 3-man teams, you can actually have just a totally normal, innocent guy who was like, I was on the Davy Crockett program, and like it was super stressful, and like you mentioned, the diets and the special clothes and all this stuff, like it's so real for them because of all the things they had to do. Which it just kind of plays into the psychology mind games around getting people to believe that things exist by letting them get as close to inspection as possible, but they'll never actually touch it because it
Yeah.
would be certain death. There's a series, I think it's HBO called Chernobyl,
Mm-hmm.
and that series kind of is it's not hilarious to me, but it's impressive how much propaganda goes into that around the whole nuclear kind of thing. Because on the one end, it seems like they're saying in the show, like, nuclear is really safe if, as long as you're not Russia. And then the other end of it, they're like, yeah, if you even like look at this special metal, you'll die. So
Yeah.
stay really far away and don't get too close because you'll just die a horrible, horrible death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's also just going back into the idea of, if you can't verify something, if you have no way of being able to tell, nobody else does either. And if nobody else has any way of really being able to tell that these things are legitimate, then they're going to be faked. Because there's no reason, even if it is real in one way or another, it's going to be exaggerated, it's going to be manipulated to be something that is so far away from what it can be, because there is the option of doing so. In the same way with those YouTube shorts or video clips of, oh, hey, can I play a song with you? Just authentically, just randomly walking up to somebody, and then you just have the most perfect, beautiful music being played. You can't really know if that's fake. Like, you can't look at the contract, look at the money, look at how these people
Right.
knew each other. You could not ever get hard factual pen to paper details on whether or not these things are fake, which just goes into the premise of uh, understanding the mechanisms behind why when something can be faked, it will be faked.
Yeah, I mean, in sports, you look at this. If we're just going to believe kind of on the surface level how sports work, anyone who can cheat in a way that can't be verified is going to, and they do repeatedly. And the only way that we, would allegedly know about this is someone talks about it. So eliminating that by kind of adding in, or not really adding in, but understanding the element of Babylonian kind of altar culture that exists, that is eliminated because they're controlling all that's coming out in terms of what goes on the media. So they're not going to get this random person to squeal. And then on top of that, when you're brought up in this thing and it's your life, you're not even thinking like it's a bad thing. They don't have necessarily the same respect for us or for human life in general that we would have growing up in just a largely Christian nation. So in that regard, you're not going to have people who have guilty conscience about what they're doing, which is primarily how you get people that are blowing whistles, like in the sporting events arena, so to speak. It's like, oh yeah, we won so many championships. We were actually cheating in this really subtle way that you could never prove, but now I'm blowing the whistle on it.
Yeah, Deflategate or something, whatever
Yeah,
these things are.
I don't know.
What's it called? So this is always a thing of people always sort of project themselves onto people that are in this situation, and they think, what would I do in this situation? Or somebody would be kind of like me, like somebody would have a guilty conscience.
Yeah.
And they surely would say something. So because they're not saying something, like clearly nothing must be up. That is something that is explicitly being done, is sort of painting these people like you. And in the same way that, if somebody just is an actor playing a role, you can just completely ruin their career and cancel them and take them off all of their shows and make them become a social pariah to where they can never show their face again. And then they can just go on and play a different character. They can just exit stage right, come on stage left. And, they, like, because they are just playing a character, you don't care if in a soap opera your character gets killed off. So in that sense, if you have an emotional distance from who you are playing and the role that you're sort of supposed to be taking, in the most simple way to understand, if you are a spy in the backgrounds of the enemy lines of another country, which again, countries aren't real, so instead of taking the Babylon, all of the other countries versus us, you can take it from that perspective. Or just to illustrate the point, you can take it from the perspective of, oh, you're a US guy in Russian lines. You have all of the roles and you have all of the connections that you're taking to sort of bolster up your position and to make yourself feel authentic. And these connections are going to feel authentic for the people that you're in with, and you're going to sort of, in some ways, make it feel like you're developing some sort of emotional connection with people. But ultimately, your allegiances lie elsewhere, so you have no you have no idea of not backstabbing these people, because it was always the plan to begin with. You never had the idea of, oh, these people were so nice to me that I'm just gonna, I'm actually one of them now. Like, you wouldn't be a spy if you get to the point to where you can emotionally manipulate yourself to becoming, oh, I'm actually just not a spy anymore.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things. When we look at modern psychology, we have a lot of these kind of errors almost. And when we look at the human psyche, we look at how our brains operate, because there's all these stories always, and it's always a story. Not something that's super, super verified of like, oh, there was a Russian sleeper agent that was in the US, but then he defected once he saw how good we have it. And it's like, that's just not really the psychology behind the people that would be selected for that kind of a program. Nor would it be something that we can look at any examples of where we understand the psychology of that individual. When you're looking at stuff released, say, by the CIA and their scouting programs, or the tests they're using to determine whether someone would be a good fit for infiltration versus analyst and things like that, one of the things they take into account is, can this person just kind of rationalize everything they're seeing through the lens of these are the enemy still? And that's something that's really powerful. And we have tons of data on that set. So we know it's something that humans can do, where you can go deep undercover and go, wow, these guys have it way better than I have it. And instead of being like, oh, I want to join them, you just hate them even more. You just dislike them that much more. And you are so much more committed to the role. And the same happens when you infiltrate a society or a country that has it way worse than you. You go, wow, look at these people. They just have nothing. I hate these people. This happens both ways. And that is the psychology we actually see. And that's the actual way in which infiltration and spies work. They're not compassionate. They don't gain compassion by being close to those people. But we have all these stories about the spies. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And then I defected or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the exact same thing as the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing of like, oh, the kind of blackmail thing is when you hear all of these stories and all of these media points and all of these James Bond spy flicks where you have, oh, that exact scenario of the spy who's just like, I was really on this team, but I'm switching sides, I'm defecting.
Yeah.
In that sense, and you hear all of these, oh, in the Cold War everybody defected, the world was split into two,
Yeah.
east and west, you got Metal Gear Solid, all of this kind of stuff. And
beautiful game.
yeah, so in this sense you're having it to where uh you're essentially promoting the idea that things aren't the way that they are and that things are a particular way, to where it just runs cover for what is sort of actually going on. Because if you make people believe in media that spies are temptable, that if they go into a place and they try to infiltrate, that they can be tempted by the people unknowingly, then all of a sudden you're going to believe that, oh, spies aren't actually that efficacious.
Yeah.
And then so if you think that somebody is a spy in sort of your world, in the whole high Babylon versus low real people, in that sense, you're just going to think, oh, hey, no, I've been a good person. People around this person are a good person. There's no way that they would be somebody who's not on my side. This is always where I just look at Attack on Titan as a piece of media that can really sort of illustrate this concept, and why, despite it being, an anime and like super popular and like, generally in like what would classically be considered like a slop category, there's so many mechanisms that can explain so many of these things, to where it's really difficult to understand the kind of worldview that we're portraying, but it's exactly what is shown in Attack on Titan. And people look at Attack on Titan and they can fully get on board with all of the mechanisms for why all of this, how all of these things occur, which is why I think it's so valuable as a piece of sort of shared media. Because if somebody has watched Attack on Titan, as an example, it's so easy for me to explain all of these concepts about how, there is a secret society who's, holding on a truth of the fundamental nature of the realm that we live in, and they're dispersed everywhere, and yet they can still keep everything completely secret. How these sort of secret societies work, and how somebody can be a spy in your back line who is 100% trustworthy, and you would never have even thought that they were somebody who was going to betray you until they actually did. And in that sense, it's often where there's just so much value in looking towards fiction instead of nonfiction actually trying to explain things that allegedly literally happened, in a way to be able to explain certain concepts. Because somebody can look at a piece of fiction and just take it for what it is. They don't actually need to be wrestling with the concept of, oh, did this actually happen? So in that sense, like, vampires is an obvious example, to where the archetype of a vampire is something that was just actually real. And if you tried to write it as a literal piece of history, we never would have gotten that.
Yeah.
But if you turn it into a piece of fiction, then that's actually something that can stand the test of time, because you aren't under the critique of, oh, are you actually, respecting the Count Dracula
Yeah.
properly? And then you would just never get seen. So in that sense, fiction is something that is so unbelievably powerful as a tool, and that's also why it's the most controlled space there is.
Yeah, it's kind of what brings us to kind of our next point, which is talking about fiction in general, good writing, bad writing, and how that is all part of the plan, so to speak. There's always going to be, when you're looking around, right? And let's say you're looking at, oh, who are the Babylonian controllers? Who are these people? Some of them are really, really easy to spot, just in the sense of like you can look at them and be like, they don't live in the same world as me. These are not the same world. When you're looking at like authors and such, you kind of have to understand that uh, all these concepts are kind of pervasive throughout literature, and they come from certain aspects. They come from certain appointed individuals giving kind of insight. And all of media, this would include, video games and writings and movies and things, TV shows, these all do come with kind of a preloaded point. And whether that point is something that's recycled by someone who may be a normal individual, or it's a point that's just being made to begin with, they all have elements to them that can tell us either what we're supposed to think, or they can tell us a little bit more about what our controllers would like us to think, depending on how we take that literature or that media style. So, like, for instance, looking at Attack on Titan, it's kind of easy to look at that and go, oh, there's a shred of truth here where the writer, in order to make things believable, just inserted basically some reality into this, because that is how you're going to get drawn in, just from the viewer experience perspective. And that's something you can kind of learn from. And there are other aspects of it that are just there to be subversive or to invert the narratives. And it's super easy to look at our favorite authors and just go, they got everything right, or this is all like perfect. This is how it is supposed to be. But you really have to have kind of a keen eye to understand that there is, in everything that's allowed to exist in our world, there is a point behind it. And that doesn't mean that it's all something that should be avoided, but rather you need to read with critical eyes. You need to have an eye for what is the truth behind it. Obviously, we talked about Monsters Inc. being related to kind of like the adrenochrome thing. There's a perfect explanation there. Well, Monsters Inc. was years before, and then they kind of prime us with this concept of like, oh yeah, harvesting this, that, all the mechanics behind it, so that when they release the other thing, people go, oh, look, they're telling us what they're doing. Well, that's one aspect you can look at it. Or you can say they want you to think it's this thing, because that the horror, the frustration, the anger that comes out from understanding what they're doing then is channeled, and you're thinking about them. You're devoting so much energy to them without really, you're not hurting them with any of your actions, your accusations and such, but your energy is directly towards them. Your thoughts are towards them. You're feeding them all these kind of abilities and powers, so to speak. But they primed you to think that horrible thing by having the media first and then the news about it later. And there's other books that do this in different ways. But this is a big aspect to understanding what they want you to think, and also what is actually true. Because what gets into fiction, like you just mentioned, can be more true than what is going to be in the history books.
Yeah, and this is where it's like, oh, with the whole Monsters Inc. thing, people will look at that, and if they go into like the level 1 conspiracy take, it's like not level 1, maybe a couple levels above that, but just of the idea of, oh, this is kind of predictive programming for something that they're actually doing. But it doesn't matter if they're actually doing something if you believe that they're actually doing it, because ultimately it's all about changing what your belief is. And that's always the question that you have to be asking with any piece of information that you're gotten from any source whatsoever, is what is this person trying to get me to believe? What is this person trying to get me to think? People can often see this with like the salesman archetype, to where, they might have like really good, conversational skills. They might be like very buddy, but then you ultimately know that even if they're really expertly dodging, oh, I'm pushing a sale on you, that they're still trying to push a sale on you. And people can see it in that sense, and then see it with the things that they see from what they perceive to be their enemy, but then they never see these things for who they would consider sort of their friends, and people that are like them, or people that have the same sort of thoughts as them, and so they never really look at it from that angle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analysis of that particular kind of aspect there. And one of the other aspects I want to talk about is just kind of subversive messaging in general. So like Monsters Inc. would not be qualified as necessarily subversive messaging. It's just a message. It's just like, this is how this goes. But there's a lot more stuff that's more subversive, in the sense that it has kind of like a shocking overtone, or there's like the main story, and then like in a little blip here or there, you see these things that are just taken for granted. And those things that are taken for granted are the subversive parts. They subvert your conscious, and you go, oh, well, that's just the way things are, because in the movie or in that show or in that book, it was accepted that this is how it is. And you have to be careful, because sometimes there's truth in that knowledge that is accepted. But oftentimes the subversive messaging comes with the acceptance of good, the establishing of morality. Oh, obviously it's the right thing to do X or to do Y. And so when we watch media, especially fiction or fantasy critics, you see them always criticizing a lot of things. They criticize, magic systems, and they criticize characters, and they criticize any number of things. But a lot of times they can miss the more subversive text that appears, which could just be an underlying, theme. Something like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs too. Very, very goofy movie.
Okay.
Not a lot really there in terms of strength, but like there's kind of in it is the subversive nature that like people who are posting health advice, or people that are like dietitians, are just evil.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of just accepted in the whole plot. It's like, yeah, those people are bad guys. And they're bad because they want you to be healthy.
Yeah,
Even, just because that guy's the bad guy.
Yeah. It's like this whole there's one show was like The Devil or Satan or something, where it's just like literally that's the title of the show, and like one of the characters just is Satan. And like the first thing that he says in the show is essentially just like, oh, I'm having a steak, and oh, it clogs my arteries, but I don't have arteries because I'm the devil.
Yeah.
And so that's a way of kind of like, obviously, this isn't literally the devil, and that's the thing that is being oh, this is the part that's fake about it, but oh, these other things that they're saying are just totally real. Obvious example you could give is any like historical film. Like you look at Gladiator as an example.
Yeah.
Like people would obviously be able to tell that like, oh, maybe these events are a little bit dramatized, but the background setting of, what was ancient Rome like, what were the setting of how it takes place. Those are the things that people really pick up on, but those are not things that people will ever question. So people are getting their worldview distorted about, oh, how are these things actually like, when people will say, obviously, the story of the Titanic, there probably wasn't literally, like Jack and Jill or whatever their names were, doing this on this boat and having that particular story. But then you take every single other aspect of the Titanic as a given.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, all of the background stuff is real. And that background stuff is the thing that will influence your worldview more than the actual story, or not necessarily more, but in a more clandestine way, because it's also not something that you're ever really going to question. You're always going to take those background elements as, oh, they were more or less accurate or true to the statement. If you look at something like Gladiator, maybe the one thing that you're looking at is like oh, they're just like kind of pushing this as like a fake thing, is like, oh, we love democracy. And everything is about, oh, we got to have a democratic nation.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that is just the ultimate good, which is kind of painted in every movie. And you'll see that aspect and you'll be like, oh, they're just trying to push democracy good in every single piece of media ever. Like this is even a thing in, like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Like people don't even, when I say this to people who have watched it, they're not even aware that this was a pretty big like plot point in terms of like what the end conclusion of the story was, but so much of it was based around like, oh, we got to get to a democracy, and it's just taken as a given of like, oh, this just is the ultimate good. And it's all of these other things of like, the magical and alchemy settings that are like, oh, these things are fake, but then the things that are more grounded or background you just take as sort of granted.
Yeah, I think that's just apparent in pretty much everything, just the democracy thing specifically, that democracy good. And even you'll see that thought carried through into, our ideas, what our politicians will say about, for instance, war in the Middle East. We got to export some democracy. They need some democracy over there. That'll fix their lives. So the fact that it's congruent throughout should tell you the authors are the same too.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are pushing it in the fiction also are trying to push it in this other element.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we have talked about also is just the quality of storytelling being intentionally kind of bad. so that there's no strength left in the poets of our day necessarily
Hmm.
to make a compelling story. Uh, Great example of this is the highly controversial take of Lord of the Rings being mid.
Yes. Yeah. So essentially, it's like in our modern world, we might look at something like Lord of the Rings and be like, all right, this is just peak fiction, peak world building. Maybe, gets a little dry at some points, having 3 chapters talking about the quality of the trees. Uh,
Yeah.
but otherwise, it's like, okay, this is super great. It's like, a great moral story and all of this stuff. But we're really just taking it from the perspective of the things that we are given and not on a sort of an absolute scale. So this is something that I'll look at in, anime, right? Is that anime fans have the worst taste imaginable because the things that they consume are just absolute slop that is written for Japanese teenagers in a comic fashion. And this is why, in the sense of, how what kind of standards that you have for media. If I was to give somebody um, who's a well-read person but has never gotten into anime, I would give them something like Legend of the Galactic Heroes. If there's somebody who's just a smart adult, because it was from a novel series, it didn't have any of the same like pitfalls. It's just uh, for the medium, essentially the best that you're ever going to get. So if that is your introduction, then you're going to look at everything else and be like, I can't accept this because this stuff is so far below the level that I am used to that I I just can't be bothered wasting my time with this. And then so in that same level of changing the standards that we have for media, when we look at all of the um, stuff that we're given today, then we look back at something like Lord of the Rings and we can say, oh, this is just the best thing that possibly could be, when there's absolutely so many there's so much more of an ability to have greater stories, things that are more moral, told in a better way, that is overall just a complete masterpiece relative to Tolkien. And Tolkien is great specifically because of everything else that we're given. And also in the same sense, this is something that people go into is like, oh, modern movies are just horrible. Like people will look at Lilo and Stitch, right? The original Lilo and Stitch, and people will say, oh, it's just the best thing ever. Ohana means family, and family means
Yeah.
nobody gets left behind. And people will look at that in like 2005 or 2001 when that movie came out, because they changed a scene with planes and towers and stuff.
Yeah.
uh, and then they'll look at the new modern live action movie, and it has the exact opposite messaging, to where essentially, spoilers. I mean, if you care about spoilers in general, like, uh, that's one thing. But like, if you care about spoilers for a live action Lilo and Stitch movie in this day and age, like, just get out of here. Like, I don't care about you. Please just leave. You're just way beyond the pale. But essentially, it's just like, oh, the older sister character goes off to college, and literally leaves her little sister Lilo behind to be raised by somebody who's not even family. And it's like,
Ohana does not mean family.
and family does not mean that nobody gets left behind.
Exactly.
So people look at, oh, everything was back in the good old days. Everything was, people will have this on like a political lens. Oh, everything was good back in the days of like the 50s. And then some people will be like, oh, it was the 80s when everything was super great. Or,
Yeah.
oh, it was the 90s. And then some people will be like, oh, I loved back in the good old days of 2010.
Yeah.
And it's just, that is just informed by where people's standards are being set. So when they have standards of, oh, looking at the stuff that is released today, and oh, this thing is moderately better, they'll ignore all of the other ways in which that media has been poisoned as well. Because ultimately, media, as far as we've known it to have existed for the entire time, has always been poisoned, has always been about sort of having this sort of subversive messaging put behind it, and has always been about driving culture in a particular way.
Yeah, to get just a little specific about Tolkien, just because I want to hammer home, like, because some people may, actually, I'm not going to say some people, a lot of people are going to be like, how dare you, for suggesting that. But just to, like, to hammer a point home real quick, in the modern Rings of Power series, there's a lot of flaws, right? Um, in the sense that people will readily point out, oh, the costumes are terrible, the set pieces are terrible, the directing's terrible, the acting's terrible. Oh, and there's like women in the movie or something.
Mm-hmm.
But do I need to remind you that, like, in the Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson, we do have a female character who literally does battle with a demon, and her witty one-liner is like, "I'm not a dude, lol."
Yeah.
Like, this is how is this different, right? It's only different because your sensibilities back then were already tuned to accept that level of like
Mm-hmm.
feminism, and now that it's like, I'm like super fat and like I'm the picture of beauty, you're like, oh, this is too far.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you don't have a principle behind that of like, oh, women shouldn't go to war. It's just that like, oh, but like she was really cool and this one's not really cool.
Yeah,
And so it
yeah.
kind of draws the conversation to like this weird place where we're talking about set pieces, we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about acting, and we're talking about like feminism, when it's like those aren't the real issues there. They're intentionally put in there to make you idolize the thing of the past
Mm-hmm.
and not look too closely and go, whoa, this is kind of weird. Like Tolkien wrote this too. Like this woman goes off to war when she literally just abandoning all her responsibilities.
Yeah, yeah.
Like she has an actual role. She's literally, the queen regent. And she's like, no, my bloodline ends with me because I want to be a man. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're a reasonable individual, you should kind of be like, that character's terrible.
Yeah,
What a
yeah.
horrible person. And she's glorified,
Mm-hmm.
in Tolkien's works and in Jackson's adaptations as well. So that's just one thing. I can think of lots of others, but that's like the most egregious thing where it's like, how is this considered peak
Yeah, yeah.
when the writing is just the bad character is the good character?
Yeah, and it's just like, all right, Sauron should literally just be like, I don't literally mean biological male. I mean the race of humans
Yeah.
are not able to kill me. It does not matter if you are a woman, because
Yeah.
that is not actually what is,
Yeah. And to
being
be
put into
clear,
play.
Tolkien didn't write that part. Jackson wrote that part.
Yeah, yeah.
But that is the point I'm making, is that like we accept that and go, whoa, that's super cool. And even people who read the book at the time, I remember the reactions. They were kind of like, oh, that's not really the thing, but I like that. It's like,
Mhm.
well, why do you like that?
Yeah.
But then even Tolkien's reasoning is again, it's just when you look at it objectively, you go, oh, there's some weird stuff going on. Why this? Why that? So like if you're just gonna be a diehard on Tolkien, like, oh, he's the best of the best, then you're opening yourself up for the same tax I'm levying, a tax that I'm going to levy against Tolkien about just not necessarily writing good characters.
Yeah, yeah, and it doesn't matter whether or not Tolkien was an authentic individual, despite being, an Oxford professor, all this
Right.
kind of stuff, like really high up in that sense, because he was still ultimately a man in, the 1940s or whatever, and he's going to be subject to all of the same sort of propaganda that everybody else in, and it's still going to be written largely through that lens of the stuff of the time, even if it's trying to go so far away from it, because a lot of people might say the idea of like him essentially just taking all of these things from like literal history books that were in like the archives in Oxford, that were written in a language that like only he understands, because he understands these like northern languages, and he's actually just writing history as he's actually only writing history as a fiction story, so that this is a way that it could actually be getting out, which isn't the whole idea of what we're talking about. Vampires is that you could say under this lens that, Lord of the Rings is literally history. But even then, you can still take it as, even if there is some level of truth to that, there can still be those sort of subversive elements that are put into it of like oh, hey, here's this detail that I don't necessarily have information on. Let me just input my own worldview into this. And this goes into the same thing of, you are essentially incapable as a authentic modern author of making true peak, true work that would go beyond the class of mid, because the level of exposure that you're given to of stories is of so low quality. This is something that you can look at of the degradation of media in the way that it's commonly talked about, is that, oh, anime in the 80s and 90s was written by real people who had real lives and stuff, and now everything is written by anime fans. So in that sense, you can clearly see how things get more cartoonized, caricatured, and things just aren't as authentic or legitimate, and then people are looking at that, and then that's how they're basing their sort of, understanding of humanity, understanding of fiction, and understanding of what would make a good story, which makes people look at stuff that really just isn't great on an absolute scale. And even though there could be some elements of it that are good, they'll treat it like it is just the ultimate piece of media that could possibly exist.
Yeah, just on the point about Tolkien, maybe the theory behind him finding all these writings in these Nordic languages and then inputting his own worldview on it. There's a series. I can't remember what it's called because I don't track this stuff, but it's about NASA in the 50s and 60s. And in this TV show, one of the main characters is this woman who's a part of the maths team or whatever. And the story is basically how she got us to the moon. Like that's the whole thing, and it's based on some internet interest around a picture of a woman standing next to like a stack of papers, and they're like, "Oh, here's all the computations she did to get us to the moon," and that kind of took off. They made a whole show about this woman. But when looking at the documentation for that, you will find that in the 50s, during that time period, plenty of women worked for NASA and other military companies in the what they called computer division because they didn't have computers, so they just had tons of people basically adding up simple equations the same way a computer does it. You have like 30,000 equations that all need to be added up. You just distribute them amongst people. And so the reality is she's sitting next to the stack of papers, the equations she's done in her lifetime of working at NASA. Not a single one of them are her equations. She's just solving things that are passed down to her. So like her work was not like fundamental to the thing. But the writers of the show just took that concept that exists in the modern zeitgeist and put that as the forefront of the show. So even though the whole backdrop you could say is real, if you believe such things, even they are just inserting their own kind of concept of like, yeah, this woman was like way better at math than anyone else, and that's obviously why she did so many equations. When the reality is that, I mean, she amongst tons of other women were doing fairly simple calculations that were put to them by physicists to do this thing.
Mhm.
And that's one of the ways that people will, even if they're quasi innocently trying to portray something, if they don't know the reality, they'll insert their own worldview, and their own worldview is temporal. It's affected by what's around them. So you can't trust that just because someone is going to say, oh, based on historical events. Which historical events?
Yeah, and you don't even have to take that through an explicit like conspiratorial lens either, because like people are just going to innately understand the things that they do and always be writing things from the perspective in which they understand. It's kind of similar to the concept of like he was never left England, does not know England, in which you don't even understand how dramatically different the world that you live in is until you actually experience other worlds, other ways of living, other ways of thinking, other ways of belief. And so, in that sense, if you've just lived in a modern world your entire life, you don't even know what it is to be a modern person. You don't even understand that there is something else out there and there are other ways of thinking. Like, if you even say, on like the most low level thing, is like, oh, red meat might actually be good for you. Like, that's something that is just so shocking for a lot of people. But then if you go further, it's like, hey, maybe democracy isn't too good. Or maybe, the idea that, we are like enlightened individuals and, oh, we used to be so violent in the past and now we're just better because we just advanced to being more moral individuals through, education and tolerance and understanding other people. If you um people can't even understand that there are worldviews outside of what they're given.
Yeah, I think one of the things, it's funny you bring up morality, right? Because um, there is kind of the popular mythos that we became moral and now we're moral people. And then there is the reality of that, in the 1880s kind of gave rise to the concept of the moralist. So prior to that, there was, if you were a moralist, then you were a very small subset of people who was devoutly religious, who believed that like the Bible was the standards for morals, and that was it. And the rise of moralists in the 1880s was basically, hey, it seems like morals are kind of important. And this is what a lot of the preaching was. If you follow kind of church history, but it's not just church history, it's country history, there's a push for people to actually adopt morality. And the kickback to that, from what we now have atheism from, was the idea that, yeah, morality is good, but maybe it's not in the Bible. And now kind of the blooming of that is we have a society where everyone you meet in the Western world, you'll ask them, like, are morals important? Is it important to be moral? And most of them will say, yeah, it's important to be moral. But they don't all mean the same thing. Everyone
Mhm.
has their own individual set of morals. And so what does that mean? It means media that's written today has this quandary of, oh, I thought I was doing the right thing, but it turns out there's another perspective. Obi-Wan, the Chancellor Palpatine is evil, but from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. They're both moralists.
Mhm.
Whereas a story that was written in the 1850s probably would not have a moralist in it. And in fact, if you read Dickens' works, there's very few moralists in it.
Mhm.
There's very few people that are like, I want to do the right thing. It's not even considered a virtuous thing because moralism in and of itself, doing the right thing, was not a predominant thought process. And so, how the world changes shapes how stories are changed. A story today where there's two people and they're like, oh, I think this is right. I'm a moralist and I think this is moral. And the guy's, oh, I think I'm a moralist and I think this is moral. That story would make no sense to somebody in the 1850s. They would be like, there's no such thing as multiplicity of morals. There's one moral, and you either ascribe to that or you don't, and that's it. So just understand that recent writings are going to appeal to us more because they fit our worldview of moralism.
Yeah, and you just take that sort of moralism and you just understand the idea that every sort of piece of media is asking something of you, of what can you bring to the table. And in the same way that the person, 200 years ago would not understand a modern story about moralism, people have a lot of difficulty reading stories of the past, even though they're in the progression of what eventually got to their worldview, because they don't live in it. So it's just so difficult to actually read and understand it, because uh, there might be a lot of books that require you to read Shakespeare, and that if you don't understand Shakespeare, then you're getting like 10% of what the story is actually about, because it's building off of that foundation. And if you don't have that foundation, then you're not going to understand anything. And so when you have such a building of the foundation of what people understand. Like there is a reading list that is in public school of, uh, probably about like 20 books or so that most people in the US who go through public school will be reading. And those will be the things that influence people's morality. It's commonly talked about in the idea that there's a whole bunch of people that will just look at something that, uh, like, oh, this thing that's happening in real life is exactly what I just, or what I've read about in this book. Like, how can we be exactly like 1984? How can we be exactly
Right.
like The Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, in that sense, it's so important to also just expand your horizons, but then also understand what is the morality and even the small bits and pieces of what this is trying to push. And when you look at so many different things and try to expand the amount of lenses that you can look at things through, then you can look at things in multiple different ways, and you're not getting bogged down in, oh, I have to believe something in a very particular set in a very particular ways. Like when I look at modern events, I can look at things through the like the normie lens, and then I can look at things from the sort of the the high level political theory lens, assuming that it's true. And I can also look at the lens of, oh, this is all just theater. And I'm not sort of bogged down into thinking about something in only one particular lens, because I can look at it from so many different avenues that can allow for a more complete picture of every single aspect that goes into something. And if I don't understand something, then that is perfectly fine. But it also is just understanding that even if I don't understand how something is propagandizing me, that doesn't matter for me needing to know that I am being propagandized.
Yeah, I think in that respect, understanding what's being asked of you, like in the case of literature, is the same kind of thing that happens with news stories. If you watch newsreels from 50, 60 years ago, it doesn't make as much sense. They're delivering the news, and you would think since it's news, it would just immediately click with you. But the reality is, there's always these keywords, there's buzzwords, there's assumed perspectives. They're asking something of you that is, they want you to already understand certain things. So when you're watching news, if you don't understand something, you don't have the prerequisite to follow it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not effective on you. It just means you're not fully there with what they want you to understand already. and it can kind of be a keyway for you or an indicator. Hey, something's going on, and certain people understand it, and you don't understand it just because they have a greater context. This happens to me all the time. I don't know if we're gonna get a counter on this. I live in a rural town. Don't have I don't have a lot of access to the internet. Like, I have plenty of internet access. I'm not, a shut-in, but like a lot of the places I go, there's no internet access, so I don't find myself scrolling memes like when I'm at my home or something, because I just don't have great access there. And I don't find myself scrolling news. I don't have a TV and things like this. So there's stuff that will happen, for instance, in the Yasukeh, and I'll just have to ask, like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Don't understand the context of this. And that's just because I'm out of the loop. And it doesn't mean that, I'm not being propagandized. It just means I'm that much not well equipped to understand what's being asked of me to understand the significance of a particular event happening.
Yeah, obvious example you could probably give is just South Park. Like, South Park is something that you have to be an American living in those times to really understand what's even being said in South Park. Like, you can have the story between all the kids and whatever, but so much of it is based on literal current events. It's like listening to an Eminem song. Like, Eminem is always, referencing the things that happen right now. Like, who knows who, like, Brianna Spears or Christopher Reeves are, or all of these names, if you weren't living in those times.
Yeah.
So it's just, a random lyric about a random celebrity, and like he randomly wants to, like, do something with a putty cat doll,
Yeah, so it's funny you should bring that up, because I had an experience, and this was back in 2012, I think, which pivotal year. We'll talk. You mentioned 2012 earlier, and there's going to be more divergence on that. But just as anecdote, 2012, I'm talking to a guy, and I didn't know about Redditors at that time. He was a Redditor. I'm talking to him in real life, and he's just like, dude, you gotta watch South Park. It's like the greatest show ever. Didn't watch, right? But it stuck in my mind, because he was like, it's great. So fast forward 2017, get my hands on like the first 5 seasons of South Park, start watching. I'm just like, I don't get any of this. None of the jokes make any sense. And now then I watched the World of Warcraft episode, and it's like, I get it. And I get it all this, because that's in the time period where I understood what was going on. But all the stuff that was in that, like political stuff, talking about, George H.W. Bush and Dick Cheney and stuff. And I'm just like, I mean, now I know more because I'm more educated in the general history of political science. But at the time of watching that, I'm just kind of like, this is asking too much of me to actually watch this.
Yeah, and so this is just why it's so valuable to sort of gain all these other viewpoints, so that you can more understand things in different particular
So you can watch South Park.
So you can watch South Park. Giving an example of, like, I've never really properly watched any American TV series, like any live action TV series that's on in American channels and is like weekly. Never really watched that until like a couple of years ago. I watched all of Prison Break. And it's like, it gave me so much of an understanding of the format of how these things work, to where it's like every single, because in the modern Netflix culture, you just binge an entire series one after the other after the other.
Right.
Whereas every episode of Prison Break had to have somewhat of an assumption that this might be this person's first episode watching. So each episode has to have a contained narrative and a contained arc, and then it also has to have a ending that's like this is a super big anxious moment. It's right before like some big climax is going to pop off, and so I need to be there next week. All right, what time is this on? Let me put it in my calendar and like remind myself that this is going to be a thing. And because of that format, it's like, it's not until you get to like season 4, episode 26 that you get any sort of reprieval from the anxiety. The entire show is just the most anxiety producing thing possible. And it's like clearly not meant to be binge watched. It's just the worst thing to binge watch possible. And then, even when you do get a reprieval, it's still just like, all of this work that has been done, it's just for nothing.
Just since we're on that subject, probably my first experience with that was the TV show 24. And I did not watch it on TV. I mean, that's not totally true. I started watching it on TV, and I very quickly scrapped that and just bought seasons that were later and watched them, because of that exact reason, where it's the exact same format in terms of like yeah, I mean, it's a little less forgiving in the sense like if you haven't watched previous episodes, it's kind of over for you. Um, but there is like a previously on, and then it's got
Mm-hmm.
to have this little mini arc, but the mini arc never like finishes. It's always like, ooh, tune in next week, and then the next week it's like, that was none of that mattered actually.
Yeah,
Now
yeah,
here's
yeah.
the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
None of that mattered. Here's the real thing. And it's just a crazy ride, and just watching that a couple seasons of that really turned my taste buds against just TV in general and how that's orchestrated because it's so dishonest. And even all things aside, in terms of what we were talking about, just the subversive nature of it, like 24 is really bad in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Torture is good as long as they're Middle Eastern people, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, or like House, to where it's it's perfectly fine to just illegally break into somebody's house
Yeah,
if you're trying to save them, and you're going to give a bunch of medications that totally might kill the person just because you're a genius savant.
it's a 20-90 chance or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe it works. Maybe you just die. And there is a safer option, but yeah, I think it's this, so I'm just gonna do this.
Yeah, locking myself in the room with you, literally like administering drugs illegally. But because it worked, next episode I have a medical license.
Yeah, yeah, and also in that sense, it's like you take the main character, the Doctor House, and you're like, this person would never exist. This person is too far. But then you look at all of the other doctors, and then you take those doctors and their smartness, and then you project that onto every other doctor that you actually see in real life.
There's the subversive nature.
Yes. And so in that sense, it really the thing for me is just looking at these series is just understanding more about other people's worldviews from people that do watch these like uncritically and do absorb these, is just understanding the nature of how these pieces of media um, manipulate and influence people in particular ways, and then having a greater understanding, even though like it's not a good series, like it's just horrible morals and just the worst things that are happening. And um, but if I take it in the lens of just being very skeptical of it, it can be of value, which I think will kind of wrap it up. And then tying into this point, something that we've always talked about is like, what role does media even take within a family structure, and within like, what do you want to be giving to children? Because we're both pretty anti-media in a lot of ways, in that like these things are very dangerous, and especially if left unattended, they're going to be perverting your family's mind in ways that you aren't even aware of. Like there's always a thing that's talked about with children's media about, oh, there's all of these sexual innuendos in there that like the kids don't even understand, and if you're just kind of casually watching while it's on the side of your eye while your child is watching it on TV, you might not even get it. But like you look at a compilation and it's like, oh, Arthur just has like a billion of these, or like Sesame Street or whatever. There's so many of these references.
It can't possibly be accidental.
Yeah, yeah. And so in this sense of it is very important to guard your family of media and of what you are giving to people, because especially in those formative years is where it is most important, because those are going to be the things that shape the foundational worldview. And it's also can go into something that we'll elaborate more into later, which is just people have this modern idea of just everybody can be rehabilitated. We have rehabilitation culture to where you can take somebody who is just the most damaged, deranged individual, and you can turn them into Billy in accounting. When just rehabilitation, even if it is possible, is something that we've never actually been able to really do.
Yeah.
And so in this sense, it's so important to start fresh, to start from the beginning into making sure that you have quality stuff, and when there are subversive elements, to be able to properly frame them in ways and to give the understanding. And it really just comes to the idea of, you want to be giving your children a shield against the ills of the world, because it's so common for people to have sort of like a, like the meme of like the repressed, homeschooled Christian girl who's raised in a nice family, and then they go off to college, they go out in the world, and they come back just with, half bangs, which bangs are already the worst, but then half bangs, which is even even worse, just full tattoos and just hates everything because there's that like rebound because you've never actually given your child a shield to actually defend themselves from the ills of the world, um, which is just a very, very dangerous game to play.
Yeah, on that regard, I think it comes when it comes down to like how are you going to actually do that. Pretty big topic, but just kind of bullet points is like you have to understand it first. Understand the piece of media and understand what it's trying to do and the subversive notes so that you can properly counter it and explain what's going on. If you don't understand it, definitely don't share that with your kids.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we'll probably elaborate on that more in depth at some other point. But for now, it's another great chat.
Absolutely.
It's been real.
It's been real.
It's been real. I love that as a catchphrase. It's been real.
It's pretty good, actually.